Hi guys, BuildZoid here, and today we're going to be doing a bit of a what I would consider a progress update video on memory overclocking with 13th gen on the EVGA Z790 DARK, because until very recently, I was basically not able to get anything above 7600 to work on this board. Regardless of like what CPU I used, well, I actually don't have that many memory kits, so it's not like I had a lot of choice on the memory kit side of things. But like 2 different memory kits, 3 different CPUs, and none of them would go over 7600 until the BIOS version 1.11, which came out recently. And I've had this board since like last year. That's also what like delayed the PCB breakdown video for so long, is just like I had no proof that the board was actually stable at anything above 7600. And when I say stable, I mean like not even remotely stable. Like there was stress tests that would crash within seconds. It wasn't like, oh, it would crash within an hour. No, it was seconds. So yeah, that was not okay. But the new BIOS update has made things a lot better. And I haven't really like pushed it to its limits yet, because DDR5 is just an overclocking nightmare. There's too many different voltages that you need to deal with. There's too many and they all have sweet spots. Like that's the worst part. There's like so many different voltages that you sort of need to dial in. And you can't, and a lot of them is not like, oh, you can just raise this and things will get better. No, no, no. If some of them you raise them and things get worse in subtle ways that lead to maddening just frustration as you spend hours and hours and hours running stress tests and like getting errors, sometimes 15 minutes into the test, sometimes 3 hours into the test. So yeah, anyway, that's why I'm making this progress update video, because like finally new BIOS that like goes over 7600 and with like a decent amount of stability, and also because there's just a lot to like overclocking DDR5, and I with 13 like I mean, already at 7200 you sort of run into these problems with like 4DIMM motherboards. Like I remember like this really isn't that much. Like, yeah, like the video I did about 7200 on, what was it, the Z790 Aorus Elite board. Similar experience, much lower memory speeds. Anyway, let's take a look at the specs that I'm using here. So the Core i5 13600K, that was provided by Intel. Big thank you to them for the CPU. The motherboard was provided by EVGA, so big thank you to them for the board. And the memory kit that I'm using is a Kingston Fury Renegade 7200 CL38 kit. It's single rank Hynix 16 gigabit A die, and I bought that. So big thank you to my Patreon supporters, because without you guys, I wouldn't have that memory kit. Yeah, and the main reason I bought that memory kit is I didn't like using like an engineering sample gigabyte kit. Also, that engineering sample gigabyte kit seems to actually be worse than this Kingston kit. Even though the XMP on the engineering sample kit is like CL34 at 7200, this is CL38. I'm really not sure why it's CL38. Like, yeah, I don't know. Like as far as I know, the cast latency timing is not really responsible for many issues with Hynix memory sticks. Like it's not a high priority target for making your XMP spec easier. So I don't know why they have it at 38, because it's not even like a low voltage memory kit or anything. If it was low voltage, I could kind of understand why it's CL38, but it's like 1.45 volts XMP, CL38. Like the TRCD timing on this is actually relatively tight for 7200. Like it's not awful. It's like 44, which is pretty normal. And then the cast latency is at like 38 for some reason. Ultimately, it doesn't really affect performance, but it's just kind of weird, because there are a lot of people out there who buy memory kits based on like their cast latency timing, and it's just like, why would you set it to like, why is it not 36 or 34? Like, it's not actually, it doesn't affect stability the vast majority of the time. But anyway, yeah, so I just wanted another memory kit to use instead of just the engineering sample one, a retail memory kit. And this was the cheapest 7200 kit that I could find at the time, so that's why I bought this and not something else. Anyway, so as you can see, I do have a fan sitting over the memory sticks, because DDR5 really doesn't it runs better if it's cooler. So yeah, If you're serious about pushing DDR5, you should have a fan on it, as far as I'm concerned. So it's not really a longevity problem. It's just like, well, I have heard that if you get your memory sticks like over 90 degrees, they do degrade. But the thing is, the memory chips are only rated for 85, so that's like, I don't know why you would need somebody to tell you that. But anyway, yeah, like if you're gonna push DDR5, just put a fan on it. It makes life so much easier. You don't have to worry about like thermal instability. And there are certain timings that react very badly to high temperatures. So anyway, here's the stress tests that I've run. We do have a quick IDA benchmark on here. The read performance is terrible because I have the E-cores disabled on the 13600K. And the main reason I have the E-cores disabled is because HCI memtest really doesn't like E-cores, like, at all. It just doesn't know what to do with them. And, like, technically I could manually assign the affinity to the correct cores, but I'm lazy. Also, the E-cores add a bunch of extra heat, so yeah, and electricity in the UK is expensive. Very expensive. Which is not really a concern for HCI memtest. This doesn't load the CPU that hard. But yCruncher VST is pretty thirsty. As you can see from... yeah, the peak power consumption was 214 watts, and that's from yCruncher VST. So I don't need E-cores running that too. Anyway, the 13600K is at 5.5. Well, it's at 5.6 with a -1 AVX offset, so I consider that 5.5 because if it's maxed out, then it's at 5.5. Yeah, if it's idling, it's at 5.6. Anyway, or if it's not fully loaded, it's at 5.6. And I just hit the HDMI cable. Sorry about that. I should move the mouse so that oh, nope, the mouse cable is trapped in garbage. Okay, so... Got to be careful not to hit the HDMI cable again. Anyway, yeah, so HCI memtest passed. IDA, right, so the read speed and the write speed and all of these are basically bottlenecked by there not being enough cores. Like 6 cores just can't read or write that much data that quickly. Then again, IDA's bandwidth benchmarks have a tendency to hit the L3 cache, so that actually might be, like, let's do a quick, I'm going to quickly pull up the calculator and add it here, because there we go. So we're at 7800 right now. The memory controller is 128 bits wide, and if we divide that by 8, yeah, so that's our theoretical max bandwidth. So yeah, we are actually probably limited by the core count. However, it is also, like, the issue with IDA is if you have your memory really dialed in, on some CPUs, it'll spit out bandwidth numbers that are above the theoretical maximum bandwidth, which is what this is, and that is physically impossible. And IDA will very regularly do that. It especially does it with Ryzen CPUs a lot. But, yeah, so... Anyway, we're very close to the maximum theoretical bandwidth as is, but we'd probably see more bandwidth if we had more cores. Anyway, the latency is at 51.2 nanoseconds, which is not too bad. It's also not that important, but, you know, I'll take the one win that I have here. Anyway, so yeah, HCI memtest ran 700% on that, which is more than, like, the minimum you should run HCI memtest to is 400%, but... like I said earlier, there's been, like, when I was trying to get this stable, I was running into errors that were showing up at, like, 15 minutes or 3 hours. I think I had, like, 90 errors. So I actually ran HCI memtest overnight with some not fully stable settings. And what ended up happening is when I woke up, there was, like, 90 errors out of 1,000, like, 16, I think it was, like, 1,600% memtest. So that was really annoying. So because I've been seeing these, like, really late into the stress test errors, but also on that session, I already knew it was unstable because, like, yCruncher was upset about it. Like, yCruncher just straight up crashed. But testmem 5 passed, and then I ran HCI, and HCI, like, after, like, forever found a bunch of errors. So, yeah, it's It's kind of the thing. So I've sort of extended my test periods for most of these stress tests because of the like weird like late instability that I've been running into during testing like trying to overclock DDR5, because it's just like yeah, like I don't want to be giving people settings that are like kind of unstable on my end and then like really unstable on somebody else's system, which is still entirely possible with what's fully stable here, because like I mentioned earlier, with DDR5 there's a bunch of voltages that have a very specific like optimum value, and that optimum value depends on what motherboard you have, what CPU you have, what BIOS version you're on, and it's just infuriating. So anyway, yeah, so HCI mem test passed, and I'm just running it out to like well over 400% at this point. I think in the future, if I go for something like 8200 or something, I'll probably just go all the way and run it like all overnight. Y-Cruncher VST, as you can see, ran for over an hour without any errors, and this was the big one. This is the one that was like the big difference between BIOS version 1.08 and 1.03 and 1.11, right? So right now the board is on, actually MemTweakit tells us, yeah, we're on 1.11 over here for the BIOS version. On 1.08, at 7800, regardless of what timings, voltages I used, Y-Cruncher would basically crash within 1 or 2 loops. It just, no chance of running it whatsoever. And then with BIOS 1.11, like 7800 picked up a huge amount of stability. And then even 8000 now doesn't instantly crash, which is cool. Though I haven't really like, because I was stuck at 7600 for so long, like I haven't really pushed for 8000 yet, because I wasn't even sure if I could get 7800 to work, which after a few days, 7800 now works. So we can move on to trying to get 8000, maybe 8200. But yeah, like this is the hard one. If you can't do even a single loop of Y-Cruncher VST, like your stuff is not gonna work. So this is the stress test for DDR5, or more like Intel 13th gen, because actually with AMD CPUs this really isn't much of a problem. Yeah, like just the way their memory controllers work is just very different. So like I didn't have any trouble with Y-Cruncher on AMD, and on Intel you hit the VST test and things just start breaking very quickly. Or it's not that things start breaking, it's just like minor stability issues very quickly translate into the test doesn't run. Anyway, I also ran TestMem5, which Extreme 1 and to 7.7 preset, and that ran for 5 cycles, so 3 hours. With the 13600K. So yeah, that's what I've run here. It took way too long to stabilize, and now let's go into the BIOS and take a look at the settings. Yeah, also you can see no Windows hardware errors whatsoever, because this is another problem, and Y-Cruncher tends to trigger them. Actually, I think even TestMem5 can sometimes trigger them. HCI doesn't really, because HCI really doesn't hit the CPU that hard. But that is another thing to watch for with 13th gen CPUs, is like they will quite happily they will quite happily run certain stress tests while piling up hardware errors without actually crashing outright, which is also not good. So yeah, I do not like Intel's memory controllers. Well, like, oops, I hit the HDMI cable again. It's right above the mouse. Every time I like wave my hand, I hit it. I'm sorry about that. But yeah, like it's just a massive pain. So anyway, let's restart and go into the BIOS and take a look at all the different settings that you need to get just right, or your stuff won't work. Like, the funny thing is, at lower frequencies, you can punch in settings that are just like, well, it depends on the board. That's the other thing, is like if you have a board that's pretty weak, you need your settings pretty close to ideal, otherwise it doesn't work. But like, so like at 7600, a few things that are wrong for 7800 at 7600 actually work just fine. So anyway, let's go through. So yeah, we've got our CPU settings. The reason why I have that -1 AVX ratio offset is because Intel CPUs actually have a bug where if you set the AVX ratio offset to 0, they're gonna drop to, and they hit a heavy AVX2 workload, they're actually gonna drop to like all core max boost. So like 13600K, I think, has an all-core max boost of like 5.1. So if I put a AVX ratio offset of 0, Y-Cruncher VST will actually run at like 5.1 gigahertz instead of 5.5, which is stupid. So yeah, it's a like one AVX2 offset. 1.415 volts on the CPU, which it does actually need because we are on the default V droop. So yeah, it's not running too hot, right? Like it was under 100 degrees in hardware info. And 5.6 is like, I mean, it's not the absolute highest that I could run with this CPU, but the thing is, a lot of the CPU stress tests that also hit the memory really hard, like Y-Cruncher VST or LinPack, they get heavier the faster your memory is. So at like with like slow RAM, you can often run those tests at way higher frequencies because the CPU is basically not pulling as much power as it could because it's waiting for information from memory. Anyway, yeah, so system agent at 1.25 volts, and this was the big one for getting 7800 to work is VDDQ. If you set if with this setup I set it to 1.35, which works just fine at 7600, that causes like errors every like several hours, and it's completely random and absolutely infuriating. I spent so much time like fiddling with memory timings thinking, "Oh, there's some kind of timing issue." But no, it's never a timing issue. It's always a voltage issue. Well, no, you can have timing issues, but it's like if you've raised the memory speed and you have weird instability late into stress test, it's probably a voltage issue. But yeah, so 1.35 was like a bit too high, and so it would cause like random crashes, like way late into tests. And the funny thing is, I think on the older BIOS versions, 1.35 was like actually necessary to boot higher memory speeds. So yeah, it's been a really big change from like the 1.08 BIOS to the 1.11 that the board is on right now. I'm kind of wondering that if maybe, like, with this new BIOS, it might be possible that as I go up in memory speed, the CPU VDDQ requirements might start coming down, as in, like, it goes down to, like, 1.25. Like, maybe 1.3 is still too high. I don't know yet. I've not tested everything extensively, but that's the annoying thing, is just, like, there are sweet spots for absolutely everything. System Agent doesn't seem to sweet spot too much, but that's another one where it's like very easy to accidentally punch in a like system agent value that's too high and then it's not stable, and you're going to be sitting there like wondering why it's not stable, and it's like you just have your system agent like a bit too high, and that's why you're screwed. VCCN, I have it at 1.8 because I've actually noticed that especially pushing high speeds, for some reason raising VCCN seems to cause similar issues to like slightly too high VDDQ. But that was on other motherboards, so I don't know. It might not be consistent to this one, but I've not seen a reason to raise VCCN, right? So like this works as it is right now. So when I go up to 8,000, I might end up with completely different voltages. I might end up using exactly these voltages, but just slightly looser primary timings, because that's sort of the main thing that changes as you go up in speed is your primary timings. Anyway, VDD2 is at 1.6 volts, which might look extremely high, but I assure you that is completely fine for the memory controller. It's not going to hurt it, because VDD2 is DDR5's equivalent of like the main memory voltage rail that you had on DDR4. And there are DDR4 XMP memory kits that are like 1.6 volts. So this is just fine. The CPU is not going to have a problem with that. Because, yeah, this is basically like your old DDR4 voltage. Now, why is it that high? Well, there's an interesting reason for that. So the Z790 DARK basically requires that your VDD2 voltage is at least equal, if not higher, than your VDD voltage. Why? Because it just does. There are other motherboards where if you set your VDD2 this high, it will not post. So like I said, like DDR5 is extremely specific to each board and like BIOS version and CPU to some extent. So like some CPUs might have a higher CPU VDDQ sweet spot or lower. I don't, I have 3 CPUs and one of them is just really bad. Maybe it's really bad because I've been mashing the wrong voltage into it, but yeah, like so far the I have like the 13600K has been sort of the best behaved. Or like this is the CPU I have the most experience with and the least issues with so far. Other than like I also have a 13900KS, which should be better, but that chip is currently stuck in a ITX motherboard, so and I don't feel like pulling it out. So, yeah. Anyway, so on the dark, you basically just need your VDD2 equal or higher than VDD memory VDD voltage, and that's just a thing that the dark requires. And so I have it at 1.6 because my VDD is at 1.58. Now, do I actually need 1.58 volts of VDD? Maybe. I don't know. I don't really want to test if like lowering this is gonna help. Is this a lot of voltage for DDR5? From a heat perspective, yes. Like this is at this kind of voltage, you absolutely need a fan on the memory sticks. In terms of damaging the memory sticks, I'm not concerned. Like people have tested even higher voltages with DDR5, with Hynix DDR5, and it's just fine. So I'm not worried about this like breaking the memory sticks, unless you run them without a fan in like a really high ambient temperature. Anyway, so yeah, VDD2, and the thing is, I am pushing the like primary timings not that low, but they're kind of low. Like TCL's at 34. It might do 32. Like this is the really annoying thing is like if you don't have your voltages just right, you might change a timing and then the stress test like crashes way later and you might be like, "Oh, that's the stability problem." And it's like, "No, that was not the stability problem because you have a stability problem that shows up every hour or every 2 hours or it's just like not consistent at all. And so you'll make a timing adjustment and, test mem 5 passes and then you run Y-Cruncher and Y-Cruncher crashes and you'll be like, oh, it's because of this timing. It isn't. It's because your voltages are wrong, which just, yeah. So like I tested, like there's a chance that with these settings right now, it might do CL32, but yeah, like I'm not really in a rush to like try minimize the timings at 7800. I'm much more interested in like pushing for higher speeds next. So the TRCD though is actually minimized. I can say with absolute confidence that like the TRCD on this memory kit is not getting any lower. And TRCD on most memory kits is very much a dice roll. It's like either you get lucky and it goes low, or you don't and it doesn't, because it doesn't really scale with voltage. It does scale with temperature, but when I say it scales with temperature, you would need to push the memory sticks like sub-zero to really get any notable improvement in TRCD, and that's not practical. So yeah, basically TRCD is the timing where it's like, yeah, as you increase speed, it's just kind of going to have to get looser and looser because there's really nothing you can do about it. And it's not like it gets looser relative to the it doesn't get looser in terms of absolute delay, right? Like if you convert it into nanoseconds, it's actually the same thing. But yeah, like there's no way to like force TRCD down with like extra voltage or something because Hynix memory chips just don't behave like that. Actually, most memory chips don't behave like that. Occasionally you get anomalies like Samsung B-Die on DDR4 where more voltage makes everything better, but yeah, most memory chips, like your TCL will probably benefit from extra voltage and TRCD and TRP just don't. Anyway, then we get to the PLL voltages, which I have at 1.02, 1.02, 1.02, and 0.975. I'll be completely honest with you, I copied these off of the Z790 Elite, where these were necessary to get like 7200 working, though I did lower the memory controller PLL voltage. I'm not sure if that's actually like the issue is like just because this works at 7800 doesn't mean this is optimal at like 8000. It might not be enough for 8000. It might be too much for 8000. That's the infuriating thing with DDR5 is just like there are sweet spots for everything. So it's like and the PLL voltages really vary CPU to CPU. So this set of PLL voltages for my 13600K is like for this 13600K. It's not for every 13600K. It might not be even for most 13600Ks. It might be for just this one. Which, yeah, like, if I try to use these voltages with my 13900K, they do absolute, like, they don't improve stability in any shape, in any way, shape, or form. So, yeah, DDR5 is a massive pain. But anyway, I guess let's go through the timing. So, yeah, primaries are 34, 47, 47, 40. The TRAS might go lower. See, this is the thing, is like, I really did spend testing like so much freaking time with different timing combinations. And because of the errors being so infrequent and so late into the test, it was really just kind of impossible to tell why the errors were showing up and ultimately all of them were just because my VDDQ was 50 millivolts higher than well, it was at 1.35 instead of 1.3. Maybe 1.32 is better. We'll find out when I try push for 8,000, but like now it's like, okay, I really do need to like test a full range of VDDQ values instead of just going like, well, 1.35 should be enough, or like shouldn't be too much. It's like, no, that doesn't work. Anyway, yeah, so the primaries, like they're decently fast, but they're not like super tight or anything. TRRDS is at 4. It doesn't go lower than that. That's the actual register limit. And then we have TRRDL, which is at 10. It might do 8. It definitely will not do less than 8. I can assure you. So actually, like, both of the Hynix ADI kits I have, once you push them to, like, relatively high speeds, they just do not do TRRDL less than 8. They just don't. I have heard that some kits out there can do, like, 4.4 even at very high speeds, but I've not seen it. And it is a very quick, like, you go from 8 to 7, and it just doesn't work anymore, so... some memory kits really seem to have just like a hard limit on TRRDL. Luckily, it's not too important because this is the same group memory timing. So, you know, if your memory controller is doing a good job, you shouldn't be hitting TRRDL too frequently. Like as long as you have like 2 different bank groups to so that you can interleave the memory accesses, you don't need to use TRR. You shouldn't really have to use TRRDL. Or actually, if it's at 410, you might need 3 bank groups, because if you're going back to the same one after just 4 cycles, you'll have to wait 2 cycles longer, but it's less of a downside then. RTP's at 12. I haven't tested less than that, but generally going lower than that with ADI doesn't tend to work. TFall's at 16, doesn't go any lower than that. TCWL's at 32. This might go lower. I tried messing with 28 at one point, but it looked like it was causing instability, but evidently all that instability was just the VDDQ. Command rate's at 2. I've not tried to test 1T command rate. It honestly doesn't make that much of a difference, so I'm not interested. Like, yeah, like I'm not going to bother testing command rate. Like, it's more productive to try push the memory speed higher than worrying about like getting 1T command rate to work. Anyway, for secondaries, we've got, well, so this is another thing that frustrates me with Intel motherboards is like every manufacturer has their own, like, these are, yeah, like EVGA has like basic timings up here, which is a combination of like what other manufacturers would consider primaries and secondaries. Then EVGA has like their own version of secondaries, and then their own version of, well, no, their tertiaries are pretty in line with everybody else's, but yeah, so the divisions aren't always the same. And the thing is, like, even like Gigabyte and MSI and Asus will have slight differences in what they consider like secondary and tertiary and well, not primaries, but secondaries and tertiaries. It kind of depends whose board you're on. Anyway, TWR is not a timing that actually exists on Intel memory controllers. There's literally no register for it, so I've left it on auto because there's no point trying to set that. It does technically exist on the memory stick, but that's only for commands with auto precharge, like write commands with auto precharge. Otherwise, the Intel memory controller uses a timing that's way further down in the BIOS, which we'll get to. Anyway, TRFC's at 500. It doesn't really go much lower than that. TRFC per bank is at 400. It also doesn't really go much lower than that for Hynix ADI. TREFI is at 11112222, which you can probably guess why it's that combination of numbers. Those are just convenient to punch in quickly on the keyboard. The upper limit for TREFI is like 260,000, but the thing is, once you go past like the thing is, if you keep pushing the TREFI, if you push it too high, you can run into instability. And going from like 100,000 TREFI to 200,000 TREFI doesn't really make that much of a difference, because the thing with TREFI is you have to think about it in terms of how much time does the memory spend refreshing. And with this configuration, every, 100,000 cycles, the memory controller spends 500 cycles refreshing. That's 0.5 of the available clock cycles are being 0.5% of the available clock cycles are being used by refreshing. Reducing that percentage from 0.5% to 0.25% by going from 100,000 to 200,000 is not really going to do much. And it might cause instability. So for TREFI, and also the TREFI is like the one timing where if your memory sticks get like too hot, you will notice like major stability issues. You'll also potentially run into stability issues with like TRCD, maybe TCL, some of the primaries, but this is the other big one where it's like if your memory sticks are at like 70 degrees or something, you won't be able to run TREFI this high. And that will, and when I say you won't be able to run it this high, I mean you might be stuck at like 50,000, which still isn't as much of a performance loss, because the thing is the default TREFI value on DDR5 is like very low. It's like single thousands. I think it's like 8K or something. So it's really like default refresh interval is so short that like a lot of your available clock cycles are just wasted on refreshing. So yeah, but there's a reason why my refresh cycle timing is never some. There's not much thought put into this, because it's just like, just set it to something relatively high and it'll be fine. Just don't set it to like 200,000 if you're not like water cooling your memory sticks or something. And if you are water cooling your memory sticks, keep in mind that like, if you have your memory sticks in the same loop as like your GPU and CPU, if your water temperature gets to like 40 degrees, your memory sticks are now at like at least 40 degrees, right? Because your coolant can't lower your temperatures below its own temperature. So if your water is at 40, your memory sticks are also at 40, or higher. Actually, they should be a bit higher than that, because memory water blocks aren't really super efficient. They don't have to be. There's not that much heat, but yeah. Anyway, tertiary timings, they go pretty low. They're not minimized, and I feel like I have these raised way more than they have to be. Because like early on, I was experimenting with like 60 and 50, but like I mentioned, my VDDQ was high, like way too high back then, and so 60-50 might actually work. I wouldn't know because I didn't run the stress test with 60-50. And actually, at this point, I am not going to change them. I'm just going to leave them at what they are. It's not too much of a, like, it shouldn't be too much of a performance difference, though these are kind of important, but like these have less impact than like your TREFI timing does, but actually most things have less impact than TREFI does. Because again, like I mentioned earlier, right, if you go from the stock TREFI of like 8,000 to 100,000, like you're reducing the percentage of available clock cycles for, like you're increasing the percentage of useful clock cycles by just a huge margin. So that's why that gives such huge performance uplifts, whereas everything else is kind of minor. But yeah, like the read-to-read timings, well, the different group read-to-read, this is as low as it goes. You can't really go below 7. Same group might go lower, but probably not at this speed. Read-to-write is basically as low as it goes. The write-to-reads, these might be a bit looser than they need to be because, again, like I spent so much time trying to figure out why I was getting one error every 3 hours, and it's just like, it wasn't the freaking timings. It's always the voltages. Anyway, but basically, if you're tuning Hynix ADI and you're at these higher speeds, your tertiaries should probably end up looking something like this, at least if you're at relatively high voltages. TXP's at 4. It doesn't go below that. Then we get to the write to precharge timing. Yeah, see, this is Intel's replacement for the TWR timing. So TWR stands for write recovery. Write to precharge stands for write to precharge. Funnily enough, write recovery is, by definition, write to precharge as well. But the difference is in the TWR is counted from the end of a write command, whereas write to precharge is counted from the write command itself. So when the Intel memory controller sends a write command, it starts, and if it wants to send a precharge command after that, it counts 56 cycles from the write command, and then it sends the precharge command, which is what I have set up right now, right? At least it should be something like that. I'm not sure if it counts from like the beginning of the write command or the end of the write command. Not entirely sure about. No, when I say write command, I mean the command itself, because I guess I screwed that up. So TWR is counted from the end of the write burst there. So like from the end of the actual write data, whereas this is counted from like the hey, I want to write command part of memory. Anyway, so yeah, Intel uses this instead of TWR. It might go lower. It also doesn't affect performance that much because like write performance generally isn't that important in memory systems. Like you're not generally going to be like latency constrained on a write operation, right? Is the way to think about it. That's also why like single CCD Ryzen chips have terrible write bandwidth, is because writes don't matter. Anyway, then we have precharge to power down, read to power down, and write to power down. And yeah, you can just kind of set these super low because the power down is basically the the I/O of the memory chips going to sleep. And you can just set these as low as they go. And as low as they go is 244. That's the actual register limit. I'm not entirely sure why the Dark's BIOS says that you can set this to 1, because you can't, at least not according to Intel's own documentation. You're not supposed to be able to set it below 4. So I guess what might happen is if you punch in 1 in the BIOS, the memory controller just corrects that to a 4 in its own registers. Anyway, then down here I have power down mode disabled because that just gives you a little bit of extra performance. Which also, like, disabling power down mode basically negates the effects of these three timings over here. Because because each of these is, like, controlling the delay from a, say, precharge command to entering power down state. Well, if power down is disabled, you're never going to do that. So, yeah. Actually, like, setting these isn't actually relevant if you have power down disabled, but oh well. At least it shouldn't be relevant, because sometimes the Intel memory controllers do things weirdly. Like, for example, I think on Z590, the DR and DD timing registers are swapped. So in the BIOS, if you have like 4 memory sticks, you're not supposed to be setting DD, you're supposed to be setting DR, which is like, it's not supposed to be that way, but that's apparently a thing. Anyway, and that's also why, like, when I tune dual rank setups or any actually multi-rank setup, I just set both the different rank and different dim timings instead of just one of them, because that way, even if the, like, order is wrong, it sets all of them to the same thing. Anyway, so yeah, that's 7800 CL34 stable, Y-Cruncher stable, HCI memtest stable, testmem5 stable. And all it needs is, like, having your VDDQ at just the right value. Actually, you know what? Let's do is it going to be a quick experiment? This video is 38 minutes long. Yeah, that's not going to be a quick experiment. I was thinking, like, just bump it to 8,000 and watch Y-Cruncher just immediately disintegrate, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to take, like, a while before it does. But you know what? You know what? Screw it. I don't like, the last video about the board was an hour long. This can be an hour long too. We're gonna watch Y-Cruncher peak content. I'll be really upset if it doesn't crash within like the first 2 loops, which is still a lot better than some of the older BIOS versions, which would crash within like the first loop, like 30 seconds, very consistently. And actually, with my 13900K, they would crash in the first loop even at like 7600, which was just really annoying. So yeah, actually this 13600K's memory controller is just straight up better than the 13900K that I have. Also, if you're wondering why I bumped the TRCD, that's like the 2 timings that are... And TRP, it's because those are the 2 timings that are, like, very much limited by memory speed. Like, you just can't force them to go down. Also, if you're wondering about my TRCDWR being 24, that's an arbitrarily low number. I also tried 12, but again, like, during testing, like, I had an error and I thought, oh, maybe it's because my TRCDWR is too low, which I made a video about TRCDWR. It probably wasn't too low. It was just another random error because my VDDQ was a bit too high. Anyway, let's get hardware info going so that I can see the temperatures. And then we're just going to hit Y Cruncher. Where's the Y Cruncher? There it is. Yeah, so what this is doing is literally just running this test right here, because this test is just incredibly hard on the memory controller. It also pulls a decent amount of power, and if you have the E-cores turned on, it pulls even more power. You know, on one hand, if it doesn't crash, I'll be like, it'll make this video unnecessarily, if it doesn't crash soon, it'll make this video unnecessarily long. But if it actually passes the full hour from just doing like raise TRCD by 1 and raise speeds to 8,000, I'll be really happy. That'll save me a lot of work. I won't have to like rework a bunch of settings again. You know, maybe I should have bumped it all the way to 8200 with TRCD 49. Because it might not, like, because now that the VDDQ voltage is lower, it might not even crash at 8200 instantly, which would be really cool. Because at 1.35 it did. Yeah, 8200 at 1.35 was not an option. Yeah, it's just kind of running. Longest 2 minutes. Actually, yeah, well, kind of. Huh. Yeah, that passed. Man, this new BIOS is so much better. Like, on the previous BIOS, this would have just wouldn't at all. Like, it just absolutely would not. You know what? Maybe I'll just keep pushing it up and see. Because I'm thinking, like, well, what if it doesn't crash at 8200? Or at least, like, what if it doesn't crash quickly at 8200? Alright, did they actually... Oh, it looks like EVGA did go and, like, remove all the memory ratios that don't tend to work. Okay, well, let's try 8266. Because that, I think, has a chance of maybe working, and we'll go to 36 on TCL. And that should honestly... I think maybe the tertiaries might be a bit tight at this point, but... Well, I guess we'll find out. Like, I am mashing a lot of voltage into the sticks. So it might be fine. Also, I did try playing with the VDD voltages when I still had the VDDQ voltage too high. It didn't do anything. Like, I went from like 1.5 to, or it didn't really see. Like, I tried like 1.55 and it looked like the stability got worse. So I ended up back at like 1.58. So 8266 just booted. Like, this board, when it just comes to booting high memory speeds, has always been amazing. Like, when it first arrived from when EVGA sent it, the first thing I did was take my 13900K and the Gigabyte Engineering sample kit and just see if it would post 8000. And it just did. You couldn't actually do it much more than like take a screenshot of 8000, but it immediately worked. Which was like the first board where that happened for me. Admittedly, I've not yet had a Asus Z790 Apex here, so I don't know how it compares to that board, but of the other like of all the other LGA 1700 boards, because I didn't just try Z790 boards, I also tried some Z690s, and like, yeah, of any LGA 1700 board, this was the only one where it was like, it just boots 8000. Did I accidentally something to... It does seem to be running, so where did it go? Did it crash? Okay, it's not running anymore. Did it crash? I can't tell. It might have crashed. That was weird. Okay, this time I'm not going to try drag anything around. I'm not going to touch the window until it's initialized. Oh, okay. Yeah. So this is what would happen at like 70, like above 7600 on the older BIOS versions, was just this immediately. The CPU might not be able to do these higher speeds. Like, I do have a 13900KS that should have a very, very good memory controller, so I'll definitely be trying that CPU with this board as well. I'm not sure if I'm in a rush to do that just yet. Though I do kind of need to take apart the system that's in... Well, I don't need to, but I probably should kind of soon. Okay, let's try 8200. Actually, you know... Let's not try 8200. I'm wondering... Well, oh... No, let's try 1.25. Also, if you're wondering what the CPU VDDQ voltage is, I don't know. I suspect it might have something to do with like signal level shifting inside the memory controller. Okay, now it's very upset. Yeah, okay, now it doesn't even train. At least the board has a safe boot button. Okay, so 1.25 volts is evidently not the way to go. Because again, like, the thing is, these voltages sweet spot, right? So there's like an optimal value and anything else just won't work. At this point, I'm kind of thinking it might just not do 8266. The CPU or the board. Like, the thing about memory overclocking is like, or it might be the memory kit, right? Like, that's the really annoying thing is like, if you have, because there's 3 links in the chain, right? You have your board, your memory kit, and your CPU. And if one of those 3 things can't do whatever you're trying to do, it's not going to work. And unless you find the link that's like failing, by having a better replacement for that part of the chain, you won't know which part it is. So yeah, I think it probably would be the CPU, because like over 8000 is actually really hard on the memory controller. I mean, even 8000 is really hard on the memory controller, but more than that, I don't know, maybe bring this back up. Because actually on the Z790 Elite, I used 0.99. Yeah, and this is a minor annoyance I have with this board when it comes to the PLL voltages, which is that on, like, officially from Intel, these have 15 millivolt steps. And the board lets you adjust them in 1 millivolt increments, which is just like, I would like to have these, I would prefer if it was locked in 15 millivolt steps, but anyway, thing is, there's also the memory VDDQ voltage, which also just has like sweet spots where, like, I don't know, maybe this is too much, maybe it's too little. Without like a ridiculous amount of testing, I have no way to know. I will try loosen these out a bit. Just those two. The different group timings don't tend to be too sensitive. Maybe more system agent. Because at 8200, what would the system agent would be doing what, like 2.1 gigahertz? Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot. That's like DDR4 territory of system agent clock. Or like memory controller clock. So it would kind of make sense if it needed more system agent. Then again, it might be unstable with more system agent. Like DDR5 is just like every CPU is different. The memory kits are probably relatively consistent. Again, I've not tested that many kits, but I don't think like you're going to see timing differences, but I don't think you're going to see like huge speed differences. If it just insta crashes again, and at this point I'm not even going to bother opening up hardware info, right? Like that initial lag would just be like Windows doing stuff. That wasn't anything significant. Like the delay for the stress test starting. Okay, yeah, no, it's very upset. I don't think it doesn't look any more upset than it was before, but it's definitely not working. I wonder if there's like and the funny thing is like it might actually be drastically more stable at 80. Wait, we're still at 8266. Yeah, so that would be like DDR4 4133 in terms of the speed the memory controller is trying to run. So maybe more, well, so maybe more system agent would help, but actually at this point I think I'll just like let's just see what happens at 8200. Cuz it might also be just very unstable. Huh. So I just missed training once. Because the 54 code, like, that's a memory fail. It's unfortunately not super specific about what failed. It's just kind of like, yep, it failed. Well, you'll get that code for, like, a variety of different issues. Everything from, like, voltages to timings can cause it. Or more like, it's the end code of a error chain rather than, like, the actual part that failed. So I wasn't paying enough attention to catch how it got to 54. Oh, another thing that's really annoying with DDR5 is you have to have your socket pressure, like, kind of just right. You have too much mounting pressure, it doesn't work. If you have too little mounting pressure, it doesn't work. If you have you have a contact frame and it's not tightened just right, it might not work. And the higher the speed you're pushing for, the more sensitive it gets to, like, mounting pressure. So basically, just everything becomes a problem as you push DDR5. Yeah, okay, so that isn't really much better. So maybe my system agent voltage at this point is too high, but anyway, so yeah, I've got stuff to do, I guess. I'm kind of tempted to just like try swap the 13900 KS in there now, but swapping the thing is the KS has liquid metal on it at this point, so it's like that's a pain. It's just a massive pain to swap that CPU around. It's like my main problem with liquid metal is just like, yeah, except I swap motherboards so frequently that the cleanup and the mess it creates. Oh well, I think I'll still try to push this 13600K to at least 8000. Hopefully that won't be too difficult to get working, because 8000 already passed one loop, so, you know, how hard could it be to get it to run an entire hour? So yeah, but progress, like, that's, like, hopefully this video helps you somewhat with tuning your DDR5, and for the most part, like, if you're having weird, like, errors that are, like, way late into various stress tests and super inconsistent, and it doesn't really seem to, like, improve with any timings, it's probably because it's not the timings. It's probably, like, either it's a BIOS issue, because on the older BIOSes, like, I tried so many different voltage combinations, and just nothing worked. Like, literally, Y Cruncher would just crash in a couple seconds every single time. Like, what we're seeing here at 8200, that would be happening at, like, 70... Actually, that would happen even at, like, 76 if I raise the BCLK above, like, if I use BCLK to go a little over 7600, like, it would already start doing that. So, yeah. Hopefully this is somewhat helpful if you're trying to dial in a DDR5 system, but, yeah, DDR5 is, like, RAM overclocking on, well, Intel DDR5. It's RAM overclocking on hard mode, because you just have so many more settings, and they all have sweet spots, and if they're not all just right, it ain't stable. Now, the annoying thing is, like you can actually run benchmarks at these very high speeds, where, like, Y Cruncher might crash instantly, but you can regularly, like, run Geekbench and other stuff, but IDA is very easy to run. But, yeah, getting it fully stable where it's, like, I would actually trust it in, like, day-to-day usage, massive pain. Anyway, that's it for the video. Big thank you to EVGA for sending over the board, and big thank you to my patrons for, like, funding the memory kit. Thank you to Intel for the CPU, and that's it for the video. So thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. If you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon. There's a link to that down in the description below. There's also the AHOC Teespring store where you can pick up shirts, hoodies, posters, you know, the usual YouTuber merch. There's a link to that down in the description below. And I've also got a Bandcamp. There's a link to that in the description as well. And yeah, that's it for the video. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.